Good afternoon from the University of the Philippines Open University Campus in Los Baños, Laguna. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone wherever you are watching around the world. I'm Jules Giang, co-teaching PM 281, and welcome to our program entitled Voluntary Sector Management, VSM Education Amidst Global Trends, Meeting the Challenges of Pro-People Development. This is in line with the 25th year celebration of the Master of Public Management of UP-OU's Faculty of Management and Development Studies. We are currently live on site and via live stream at networks.upou, UP-OU Facebook page, and the UP Open University YouTube channel. We hope that you can join us as we hear timely and relevant discussions from our invited speakers. Now, ladies and gentlemen, to formally open our program, may we call on the Chair of the Master of Public Management Program of the Faculty of Management and Development Studies. Please welcome Assistant Professor Juvie Gervasio.
Today, the Master of Public Management program of the UP Open University is celebrating its 25th anniversary. And as a gift to the community, we decided to hold this webinar on voluntary sector management education. This is actually one of the major tracks of the MPM program, together with public policy and program administration and local government and regional administration. Admittedly, the VSM track attracts fewer number of enrollees compared with the other tracks. So we are now doing this on a hybrid format where there are about 80 people here at UP-OU headquarters in Laguna, while the rest are all watching this online. So this morning, we had our roundtable discussion on the history of MPM program, where we revisited the past and learned that VSM came at a much later time in the program. And earlier, we also have given out our service awards to all our partners, lecturers, tutors, etc., in recognition of their continued commitment to the program. And later, we shall be conferring the Outstanding Alumnus Award to celebrate the contribution of the graduates to the community. Last year, I was fortunate to meet two people who are knowledgeable about the topic, and I asked them for possibility to conduct a webinar together so that they can share their knowledge and experiences with us together with our VSM lecturer, and they politely obliged. I guess the Philippine dried mango and native products really works. And we hope that this webinar will provide us a picture about the developments of the field and will be able to entice the interest of other prospective students. The videos will be part of the learning materials of the program and will be accessible through the various UP-OU sites where everyone can freely watch them at their own pace and time. This event is truly a gift from the MPM program to the learning community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Assistant Professor Juvie Gervasio, for that opening remarks. Once again, let's give her a warm round of applause, please. Now, friends, as we are about to begin our set of talks from our speakers, may I remind the audience, on-site and online, that you may start preparing your questions later while listening to our speakers. And you will be given a portion later to ask your questions during the open forum. So let's start the introductions of our speakers. Our first speaker is a lecturer in the School of Applied Social Studies at the University College Cork, Ireland, where he is Program Director for the Masters in Voluntary and Community Sector Management. He teaches social policy, community development, and peace and conflict studies, and his academic research and publications have focused primarily on human rights, social exclusive and inequality. He has a background working in the community and voluntary sector in Ireland, North and South, over many years. He was chair of the editorial management board of the journal Voluntary Sector Review until November 2020 and is currently co-editor of the journal Irish Political Studies. Please welcome Dr. Philip. Up next, our second speaker is a professor for social work management from 2017 to 2019. He was also vice president for teaching, learning, and continuous education. And from 2019 to 2022, vice president for research, innovation, and transfer at the Fachschule Dresden, University of Applied Science, Dresden, Germany. From 2013 to 2017, he was managing editor, director, and a research associate of the Center for Research, Further Education, and Counseling at the University of Applied Sciences for Social Work in Dresden. Since 2020, our speaker holds the honorary position as a board member of the International Association of Social Work Management and is a speaker of the German Network of Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. He is a certified systemic coach for change management and an intercultural trainer. Please welcome the acting Vice Rector for Research, Innovation, and Transfer from the University of Applied Sciences, Dresden, Germany, Dr. Mike Arnold. Speaker holds a master's degree in Social and Development Studies from the University of the Philippines. She has been part of the faculty as senior lecturer of the UP Open University since 2011. She was former faculty at the Social Sciences Division, University of the Philippines, Baguio. Our speaker is also a socio-economic development professional who worked with various local and international non-government organizations in the Philippines, in the South and Southeast Asia. Lastly, she's also a founding member and board of trustee of an environmental nonprofit, Zero Waste Baguio Incorporated, lead co-convener of Climate Change Action Group. Please welcome UPOU's very own Miss Victoria A. This talk is titled The Relationship Between the Voluntary Sector and the State, the Role of Advocacy and Agency. Please welcome our first speaker, Dr. Philim Ohadmil.
Okay. Can I just ask, can you see my screen okay? My shared screen?
We can't see it yet, sir.
All right, okay, so this is, okay, sorry. Apologies for this. Let me try this again. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. Apologies about this. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it now. Go ahead, sir.
All right, okay. Okay, so thank you very much to everybody for inviting me to talk. I hope that there is something worthwhile that I can contribute to your conference. I suppose the first thing to say is that what I will be talking about will be the voluntary sector and the state, particularly in relation to Europe, but also hopefully with some reference to global trends. So I suppose the first thing to say is that in relation to the voluntary sector, there are a range of different questions that we have to consider if we're going to study the voluntary sector and going to study management within the voluntary sector. For example, what is the voluntary sector, or the non-profit sector as it's called? What is its role in society? And what is this role, what should this role actually be? Should it be changed? Should it be a different type of role? What challenges does the sector face globally? And what challenges does all this present to voluntary sector management education? So to talk about what is the voluntary sector, a sector which includes a wide range of organizations which are neither public state sector bodies or private sector for-profit organizations. Internationally, it's often called civil society organizations or not-for-profit organizations. In America, they often call it the non-profit organizations. In Britain, it's sometimes called the third sector to distinguish it from the private sector and the public sector. In Ireland, where I come from, we usually refer to it as the voluntary and community sector, because a lot of our voluntary sector organizations are based in local communities, geographical communities, around parishes often. In general, the third sector, or the voluntary and community sector, is viewed as a space where people in civil society can organise to attempt to do something viewed as worthwhile or important for them and their community and society. Now, if we think about that, that space for people to organise, independent of the state, independent of the voluntary sector, of the private sector, and can create a centre of power, a site of power for ordinary people in society. And therefore, in some societies, that's something that is welcome, but in other societies, it may not be welcome. It may seem as a threat to the status quo, a threat to the government, a threat to powerful interests within the society. And that's something that we have to consider whenever we're talking in terms of voluntary sector management, because in different societies, there are different views about how we should view the voluntary sector. Voluntary sector organisations, although diverse in terms of size and purpose, are perceived to hold distinctive sets of values, as do the people who work and volunteer in them. Values are perceived to exert a strong influence on people's behaviour, motivation, particularly in choosing to work in the voluntary sector. So the people who work in the voluntary sector often want to work in that voluntary sector because of their own particular values and the values of those organisations. Values are considered to be at the heart of the sector and guide what voluntary sector organisations do. For example, protecting vulnerable people in society, helping people deal with poverty and inequalities, or campaigning to save wildlife or protect the environment, or to promote particular views, behaviours in society, particular ways of life. For example, voluntary sector organisations may be promoting human rights, may be promoting equality, may be promoting participating in democracy, may be promoting community values and bonds, good community relations, social integration, healthy living. So there's a range of different aims and objectives that voluntary sector organisations can have, and some of them will marry with the state and the powerful forces within a society, but some of them may actually challenge the state and challenge powerful forces in society. And that is one of the reasons why often voluntary sector organisations find themselves in conflict with the state, with the status quo, with powerful forces in society. Some of the values that voluntary sector organisations may have include religious values, cultural values, ideological values, community values, secular values, maybe scientific education, evidence-based values. So the notion that we're operating on the basis of an evidence-based approach. Democratic values, trying to promote empowerment, community development, person-centered activities and inclusivity, etc. Tolerance of diversity, transparency, accountability, and human rights-based approaches, equality, etc. And there's a range of different values that voluntary sector organisations can have. And not all of those values will be values that will be shared by mainstream society, particularly we're talking about minority groups or minority interest organisations. And some of those values we may not agree with ourselves. So you can see how potentially in a society there may be a range of different types of values not everybody would agree with. And in terms of in terms of the types of activities that voluntary sector organisations engage in, they can range depending on society, from involvement in education provision, health and social care provision, provision for housing and homelessness, organising credit unions, cooperatives, mutual organisations that help people who have limited means and don't have a lot of money to come together and provide for example, housing or provide for needs in a community. So unions could be part of a voluntary could be part of the voluntary sector. Employers organisations. And of course, also we have organisations that are involved in campaigning and lobbying for change. And those are the ones particularly that I want to raise awareness about. One big debate among academics and voluntary sector organisations themselves is around to what extent voluntary sector organisations are actually driven by specific voluntary sector values. To what extent are their agenda, their organisational processes, practice, policies, activities, to what extent are they driven by values? And to what extent are those these driven by other factors. For example, the personal motivations of individuals who might have an ego, individuals who might have ambitions for the future, people who just want a job. And at the end of the day, most of us need a job to survive in our societies. And maybe that's what drives us to get a job in a voluntary sector organisation that's paying, and then that helps us to provide for our families. Agenda and activities may also be driven by government funding policies. The government may say that we give money to voluntary sector organisations if they act in certain ways, and we won't give money to them if they don't act in certain ways. Restrictions may be placed on voluntary sector organisations by government legislation. And of course, oversight and policing of the sector, of the voluntary sector, is important. We need to avoid abuse. We need to avoid abuse of people by voluntary sector organisations and by individuals in voluntary sector organisations. But we also need to avoid abuse in terms of what people do with money. If people don't steal money, etc., and particularly if it's public money. So we need oversight of some description. But oversight and policing of the sector may be different in different countries, depending on the type of society we're talking about. Depending on the side of the government in a particular country is that the voluntary sector should work in partnership with it, is something that's worthwhile, that should be promoted, or whether a government may particularly authoritarian governments, if they feel that the voluntary sector is a threat, a potential site of struggle against the government, against the regime. Okay, one big area of debate among academics and voluntary sector organisations themselves revolves around whether we can actually talk about one voluntary sector. And that's something to think about, because the voluntary sector is very diverse. Can we talk about it being distinct? In other words, can we talk about the voluntary sector being distinct from the public sector and distinct from the private sector? And in different societies, it's hard to actually see a black and white distinction between the voluntary sector and the private sector and the public sector. Is the voluntary sector, for example, independent of government, or is it controlled by government? Is it, for example, often in terms of the private sector, non-profit organisations may be set up and run by individuals who get paid a salary. And although they may not have, these organisations may not have paid shareholders like the private sector, nevertheless, people might benefit financially out of the existence of that particular organisation. Private companies may also set up voluntary sector organisations. Often they set up charities to provide certain services. A question then arises as to what extent these organisations are based on values or the promotion of particular values, and to what extent they're based on providing tax breaks for private companies, public relations exercises for certain companies, oil companies, for example, setting up a voluntary sector organisation to promote a green environment. Those types of approaches. To what extent is this voluntary sector organisation about promoting the welfare of people, and to what extent is it about promoting its own particular private interests? So there may be a blurred line between voluntary sector organisations and private sector organisations at times. Voluntary sector organisations may also provide services which charge. And so there may be a question as to what extent they look different from a private sector organisation. And of course, in terms of the public sector, many societies in which voluntary sector organisations are used by the public sector, are used by the state to carry out state programmes. The voluntary sector has often been regarded by successive governments as central to the delivery of national programmes for services, or facilitating consultation mechanisms if they want to consult with the population or sectors of the population. Public services may be subcontracted out to voluntary sector bodies, or provided on a partnership basis with the state, or provided on a charitable basis. There's a range of different services which may be subcontracted out by the state to voluntary sector organisations. In my own country, Ireland, for example, something like 90 to 95% of primary schools are owned by churches, and the state allows the churches to run the education system with lay people, of course. It provides these organisations with funding to provide those services, and it provides wages for the teachers, etc. But nevertheless, the churches have a role within the delivery of these particular services. Many community and value sector organisations, however, aren't simply about delivering government policy. They're not simply about providing services. Many value sector organisations describe their role in terms of community development, or a commitment to social change, or the promotion of equality, participation in society, anti-discrimination, promoting democracy, promoting respect for diversity. Many are about their meanings and objectives relate to identifying new need. So need that has not been identified by the government or has not been provided for by the government or the state. So they're about trying to provide for those needs. And of course, also sometimes providing different choices. Sometimes the state will say that there's a need and these are the choices of services that we're going to provide for people. And voluntary sector organisations might say, well, that's not wide enough. You need to have wider choices. Also, voluntary sector organisations may be involved in lobbying, mobilising for societal provision to meet need or enhance the well-being of people. One of the things that voluntary sector organisations are often involved in is providing a voice for those who are disenfranchised, for minority groups in society, or even for the majority in society, who may be poor, who may be isolated, who may be estranged from society and the state, etc. In terms of state oversight, of course, as I've said before, state oversight is necessary, protecting rights of people, preventing abuse of people, and preventing abuse of funding. However, there is also a danger that such oversight can limit the independence of the sector and its ability to do its work based on its own agenda and follow its own values. So in other words, the state may simply use the voluntary sector, if the voluntary sector is not careful, to carry its work and its agenda, rather than the voluntary sector being able to decide its own agenda and follow its own values. Structures of governance often need to be provided within voluntary sector organisations, which are linked to greater efficiency, effectiveness, accountability, and transparency. And new public sector management ideas which are linked to transferring management ideas from the private to the voluntary sector, may clash with work practices and culture of an organisation. The idea, for example, of greater efficiency and effectiveness may lead to a different type of service provided by your workers to local people, for example, to your clients, to your client base. It may remove the value-laden elements of it. It depends on how we measure efficiency and effectiveness, of course. If efficiency and effectiveness is just the numbers of people that we help, rather than quantity, rather than quality of that help, then you can see how potentially that might clash with the types of values that people in some of these organisations might have, etc. Funding policies may alter the priorities and agenda of organisations as they follow the money to survive. So they may move from a particular type of activity to another activity because that's where the money is available for. And that's one of the things that that must be uppermost in the minds of those that are running organisations, that are in leadership roles in organisations. To what extent is our agenda being distorted by the fact that we need to have money to survive? And how do we balance that out with our values, etc.? The other thing about oversight is that it often requires organisations to have systems in place to ensure the organisation is run properly, compliant with legal, financial, and other requirements. Promotes openness, transparency, and accountability. And so there are a range of different types of oversight, and there's a range of different types of responsibilities that are required of voluntary sector organisations by the state. And of course, coming with that also are a range of different skill sets which are required for those that run organisations, such as people who are involved in boards. And you can see how potentially, therefore, we can move away from a board which is inclusive and representative of a particular group of people in society, or which is democratically elected, for example, to represent that group, to a board which has particular skill sets, So a board may, because of the requirements of oversight, may now be made up of people with particular types of skills from particular parts of society, accountants, for example, lawyers or solicitors, and it may not be representative of the local population that it claims to be representative of. And these are questions that boards have to think about, that organizations have to think about whenever they're complying with oversight, because oversight's important. Maybe the more worrying aspect of oversight would be political oversight, particularly in authoritarian states, but even in liberal democracies, there may be political oversight, which might curtail organizations becoming involved in protest, lobbying, criticism, striving for change. Policies, for example, would say that only charities which have no political motivations or political aims, or are not striving for changes in society, that only those types of organizations will get funded. Apolitical organizations, for example. Governments favouring friendly cooperative organisations with funding and not others. And you can see how that would happen. That could potentially happen in even liberal democracies or countries which regard themselves as liberal democracies, where governments would favour organisations with funding that are similar to themselves, that are not going to challenge them, that are not going to attack them in the media, etc. And of course, often we've had political vetting of groups, where funding is actually refused to groups because governments and funding bodies don't like the groups. And sometimes they don't want to fund the groups for the right reasons, because the groups can't be trusted with money. But in other cases, it may be simply because the funders don't like the criticism from those particular groups. And of course, there have also been instances where groups have been banned, labelled as illegal, or even terrorist, because of their aims and objectives. And that can often happen as well in liberal democracy, particularly during an emergency period when emergency laws are in existence. Issues that may obstruct organisations from being value-led may include a range of different factors, like the top-down nature of the relationship between government and the voluntary sector, for example. Funders preventing legitimate campaigning, funders influencing the activity and direction of a voluntary sector organisation. Voluntary sector organisations rely too heavily on one source of funding or contract, which may then make them beholden to, for example, a government or a government department. Perceived pressures to become more like a business rather than more business-like. So if we become more like a business, to what extent are we following our original aims and objectives and our values? And one of the challenges, therefore, does all this present to voluntary sector management? Well, one of the things we got to think about when we start talking about voluntary sector management is, what is the voluntary sector? We have to think about the different values which exist within the voluntary sector, the different aims and objectives, the different organisational structures and cultures within voluntary sector organisations, different methods of funding and fundraising. Where do we get our money from? Some voluntary sector organisations refuse to take their money from governments. Amnesty International, for example, refuses to take money from governments because it doesn't want to be influenced. It says in terms of its reports. There will be different legislative, policing and state oversight regimes in different countries that we need to take into consideration when we're talking about voluntary sector management, education for the management of voluntary sector organisations. Different methods of working with our clients and communities. How do we work with our clients and our communities? Again, is it a top-down approach? Do we provide a service, or do we involve people? Do we empower people from our communities and in the work, etc.? And even in terms of our workforces, there will be different management styles, different management cultures and practice. Are we a hierarchical organisation, or do we believe in participatory management or shared management roles? Or some form of consensus, developing consensus within the organisation. And also the other thing we have to consider are different and often changing cultural, political and social and economic contexts. And of course, in different countries in the world, there are going to be different cultural contexts, different political contexts, different social contexts and economic contexts. But even in one country, you're going to have changes and different contexts existing. Okay, so A lot of stuff there, probably went over my time, and I apologize for that. But if anybody's got any questions, hopefully we can look at them later in the discussion element of this. Thank you.
Next talk, which will focus on social work management education, preparing students for the global challenges. So now we move on to our next speaker. Please welcome Dr. Mike Arnold.
Yes, I will share my screen. Hopefully it works. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, perfect. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to address this esteemed anniversary webinar and to share my thoughts today about the social work management education. As we gather here today, I'm reminded of the immense privilege and responsibility that comes with being part of this large community of the University of the Philippines. Before I begin, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the organizers of this conference for providing us this platform and to come together. And in the next 15 minutes, I hope to provide you with some insights and new perspectives that will inspire and hopefully encourage you to continue the quest of developing a higher education didactics for the field of social work management. And I believe the exchange of ideas will help us to provide the opportunity to develop the quality of the social work and social work education. And it helps to prepare students for the so-called global challenges. Without further ado, let us begin our journey today. And when I think about the pedagogy of social work management, this is actually a story that needs to be written. And it's actually groundwork, it's actually gardening. And this is the metaphor I would like to use today. We know certain plants, but there is still much to discover about the complex nature and the potential benefits that may hold for the development and the cultivation, so to say, of the human health and the environment. And today, I would like to talk first about a specific plant and a case, which is the German social economy, which is the specific cultural and historic form I'd like to introduce today as one possibility for the voluntary sector. This will help us to understand the requirements for the future social management workers in the field. And we need not only to think about this plant, but also about the greenhouse where plants can grow. The greenhouses are the, so to say, living laboratories, such as our higher education institutions that offer boundless opportunities and ways to discover new things and to innovate also things in the field of social work. And if we think about educating future social work managers, this is a collective effort, and it requires also a transdisciplinary approach, which I'd like to present today. Last but not least, I'm looking forward to engaging with you in a live discussion after today's presentations. I will start with a brief overview on the origins and the historical background of the German social economy, which can be understood as a specific case, and it may be also replaced by other welfare systems when I will later talk about discipline-specific higher education didactics for the social work management. And additionally, I will present some characteristics as well as the indirect system of the financing of social services in the social economy in Germany. The origins of the German social economy can be traced back to the early 19th century, a time of considerable economic and social change, and which is characterized by the rise of the industrial capitalism and the emergence of new social movements seeking to address the inequalities and the injustices of the era. And early drafts of the social economy can be traced back to the 1800s. For example, in the Catholic social teaching, we could mention the social encyclical Rights and Duties of Capital and Labor. And this works emphasizes the importance of improving the conditions of the working class people. And it also advocates for the rights of labor to unionize, while rejecting socialism and unrestricted capitalism. And there was also Leon Walras with his idea of the social economy, which is based on the idea that economic systems should serve the needs of the society through the regulation of prices, income distributions, and the coordination of production and consumption. And all this should be guided by ethical considerations and also by social responsibility. Since the 1820s, the cooperative movement became stronger, and which followed the principles of voluntary and open membership, self-organization, distribution of surplus and profits based on the cooperative activities and not based on the capital. But at that time, the German Cooperative Act did not allow to organize social providers or social services. It was since the 1850s that we saw a vivid institutionalization of social care through the organized diaconia. The idea of diaconia embodies the Christian principles of services to others, compassion, and justice through the provision of practical assistance. About the 1880s and 1890s, it was the Prussian Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck. I do not know if you ever heard about him, but he sought to address the growing social unrest and the political pressures at that time by introducing a system of social insurances that provide social security and promotes social stability. They are called the Bismarckian social insurances, and they include sickness insurance, industrial accident schemes, and old age invalidity insurances. And this was unique at this time and in the European context. After the Second World War, there was a boom-like growth of the welfare state and thus of service providers. The full cost funding became the norm. This means that all costs of all services were financed by the state, no matter how effective they were. Only since the 1980s and 1990s, this system of fully financing all services was restructured according to the principles of the new public management. The new public management is a set of management principles that aimed at improving the efficiency and effectivity of public sector organizations through the adoption of private sector management techniques and practices. And this included, for example, that service agreements need to be negotiated between the service providers and the state, and that we have a kind of crazy market where social organizations have to compete for the finances. The social law triangle in the German social economy refers to the relationship between the beneficiaries, the social providers, and the public funding agency, which is regulated and by a variety of laws and regulations, and which is very specific for the German social economy. And this is how it works. The service users who seek advice request the service. The public funding agency has the obligation to provide the services. But actually, it does not provide the service, but there are the service providers who care for the beneficiaries. What are these service providers? Service providers are, in most cases, non-profit organizations, and to a small extent, also private providers and public social welfare institutions. And all costs that the service providers have in terms of caring for the beneficiaries and the service users are refunded by the public funding agency. And this is called the indirect financing system, And this is the fundamental principle of this German social economy. Let me shortly summarize again. The German system of the indirect financing of social services involves the government providing the funding to the non-profit organizations, allowing them to deliver the actual services on its behalf, while also regulating and monitoring their activities. So far, I have introduced you to the characteristics of the German social economy. Now we will build on that knowledge and raise the question of how social work management can contribute to the preparation of students for leadership roles in social organizations. If we talk about skills or future social workers or competencies that need to be achieved in study programs, we need to think about the great challenges in our society. And it is often discussed in academic circles with under the topic of the so-called future skills. The term future skills refer to a set of abilities, knowledge, and competencies, so to say, that are expected to be in high demand in the coming years, because technology, globalization, political and social cultural developments continue to shape the workforce and society. And these skills are often seen as essential for individuals and organizations to thrive in an increasingly complex and rapidly changing world. And in a recent systematic review, Kurzio and his colleagues from the University of Cambridge aimed to provide a comprehensive overview of the different types of future skills. And this is what you see in this slide. The so-called meta categories, as well as the associated competencies and knowledge that are linked to these domains, are highlighted here in this figure. The researchers identified 9 of these meta categories of future skills, and they include, for instance, high order thinking skills, dialogical skills, digital literacy, entrepreneurial skills, leadership skills, and so on. And in order to address these skills in social work management education, we need to approach social work management from a multidisciplinary perspective. And the need for a multidisciplinary perspective to social work management arises from the complex nature of social problems and the diverse needs of individuals, families, and communities that social workers serve. Social work management involves the coordination and the administration of social services and its policies. In order to effectively address these challenges, knowledge and expertise from different disciplines is required. Some of these disciplines are shown here, especially if we talk about the business administration, which focus on managing organizations, and when we talk about economics, which focuses on the study of how societies allocate scarce resources, for instance, public goods. Then the public management I already mentioned is a field where students have to learn how public institutions are managed. Then public politics and law is relevant to understand the political system and to practice the law. Social work, of course, focuses on the theory and practical application of methods that help us to work with individuals, families, and communities. Sociology, the study of social behavior. Psychology, human behavior, emotions, perceptions, learning processes that need to be focused. Educational sciences that focuses on pedagogy and methods. Cultural studies, sustainability studies, and also life skills need to be focused in order to provide the development of practical skills. The knowledge of all these disciplines contribute to the development of an awareness of social responsibility, of social impact and economic action. And eventually, we need to think about the question of how can we develop and understand and apply the principles of each of these disciplines in our training and teaching of the future generation. Based on the research in previous years, I suggest discipline-specific framework for social work management education. What you can see here in this figure. The didactics of, or the pedagogy of social work management is understood in this field as a specific general didactic, which is positioned between the discipline, is characterized by certain didactic elements, is carried out by different actors, and considers the specifics of the professional field, which means there are 5 elements that need to be combined. The first one is we talk about a specific topic of higher education. So we need to develop a social work management education and need to combine the discipline-specific perspectives. And it's specific in terms of it refers on the teaching and learning process of higher education institutions, not schools and not vocational training where already such concepts exist. Then social work management needs to position itself between the disciplines, which means it's all relevant, all the fields and all the disciplines I've mentioned before need to be implemented into the study program. Then third, we need to integrate different didactic elements, which means teaching and learning methods and strategies need to be applied in the social work management programs. And fourth, we need to include different actors like educators, like academics, but also professionals from the field who help students to understand the practical application of their knowledge and who are able to transform this scientific knowledge in the field to teachable knowledge. And fifth, last but not least, we need to know about the specifics of the professional field in order to prepare students with practical competences and skills that are required. And if you are interested in this topic, I would recommend a recent edit volume of more than 20 scholars from 10 different countries who shared their experiences and their approaches of how to develop the social work management education. Let's conclude. I conclude with the same metaphor I introduced at the beginning of my presentation. It's in fact a crucial groundwork that we must lay in order to cultivate flourishing higher education institutions that train future social work managers. In future, we need to think creatively about the development of the hybrid discipline social work management. And through ongoing research and exploration, we can unlock, hopefully, the secrets and uncover new applications for this field and this discipline. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Arnold, for that intervention. And now let's head on to our third and last speaker who will focus on voluntary sector management education amidst global trends, meeting the challenges of pro-people development. Please welcome our very own Ms. Maria Victoria D. Bautista. Ms. Vicky, please unmute po.
Mute.
Okay, we can hear you now.
And I share my screen. Hold on. Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, Miss Lee.
Okay, so I chose for this session, I chose to focus on VSM in the Philippines, especially as it is related to the program MPM. Okay, so I start by saying with a little bit of history, which is probably with something that was already discussed earlier this morning when you talked about VSM. We know that VSM, as Juvie has pointed out, started late in the program. It was only approved by the University Council on the 5th of April in 2009. Okay, it is patterned after the VSM program of the National College of Public Administration, which was established much earlier in 1998. Okay, so we know from the document that was used to approve the program that the rationale for the program was the capacities that we needed to meet, like the capacity for strategic planning and resource generation, technical skills, administrative and financial systems, systematic organizational development, professionalization of NGOs, professional leadership, program management, accountability, control, compliance and monitoring, evaluation, and effective program management. Now, for those who are not very familiar, the intended learners, according to the document, are primarily the officials and staff of organizations in the voluntary sector. And the faculty, those who intend to teach, so those who practice in the field, okay, and those who teach in public administration across the country, and others who may be interested in the study of voluntary sector, maybe because they're thinking of this as an potential area for their career development. Okay, now for those who are not familiar with the context of what happened that led to the development of the VSM program, we go back to the 1986, about when we had the People Power Revolution. That's whose anniversary we're celebrating tomorrow. Okay, for those who are not familiar with this, maybe they were born much later. This was the shift from the repression of the martial law era to a more democratic space. So it gave room. This change gave room for the inclusion or the participation of more civil society in the development work of the country. Okay, prior to that, much of the civil society organizations had to work underground or had to be within a very difficult framework, work within a difficult framework. Implicit in the 1986 revolution, after the 1986 revolution, the participation of civil society implied there's an implicit framework that participation and empowerment of the marginalized sector is what would lead to their development. There's, as I said earlier, there's been an increase in the democratic space and the rise in the number of voluntary and civil society organizations, as well as the influx of international grants and loans to support the young democracy. Because of the events that happened, because of the value that was placed on people participation by the new government, participation was institutionalized. If you go back to our constitution, there are very, very specific provisions that says that the state will encourage non-government community-based organizations and sectoral organizations to promote the welfare of the nation. So it specified the role of independent people's organization, the right of people and organizations to effectively and reasonably participate at all levels of society, whether it's in social, political, economic decision-making, etc. This was followed later on, very familiar to all, by the Local Government Code of 1991. The Local Government Code specifically identified the areas where civil society might be involved in governance. They specified the local special bodies, such as the local development councils, the local school board, the local health board, local peace and order council. There are also, through time, Now, after the local government code has been instituted, there are other venues where civil society participation has been opened, whether it be at the national level, at the regional level, at the local government level, even at the barangay. Our law stipulates that even at the barangay level, participation of civil society in the various committees should be in place. As well as in the local government unit. At the regional level, civil society might be able to participate in what we call the Regional Development Council, chaired by NEDA, the National Economic and Development Board. At national level, there are certain, certain structures in government have been placed where civil society participation is necessary. For instance, in my area of work where we deal with solid waste management, there is the National Solid Waste Management Council, which is mandated to have civil society participation. Okay. Likewise, we would find there's an increased participation of civil society organizations at the regional level through the ASEAN and other such bodies, as well as in, that's supposed to be government global fora, and various global fora as such as the UNFCCC, okay, the biodiversity, the Convention on Biodiversity, just to name a few. Around the time in the 1980s, a lot of emphasis was also given to good governance, which led government to adapt the participatory approach is one of the principles of your good governance. This was particularly pushed by the World Bank and IMF as requirement for loans and grants. So in addition to the interest in participation of civil society in governance brought about by the 1986 Constitution and the local government code, there's also the push that was coming from World Bank and IMF for government to involve the society, to involve civil society in governance. However, now if you go back, there's been quite a long period of time already since the program has been approved. There has already been a change in landscape. There's been a change in our landscape already in for civil society organizations. While we still need to assess to what extent VSOs voluntary sector organizations have already improved on their capacities that were lacking back in 86. We might be able to surmise from my own field, because I have worked in the field, what I have seen on the field, increased capacity of many of the voluntary sector organizations. This is brought about by donor influence. Many donors bring in capacity building activities for the organizations that they support. International INGOs, international non-government organizations, which are in a better financial position to to finance capacity building activities, have also influenced the field. Other institutions have also contributed to increasing the capacity of voluntary sector organizations, academic institutions through their extension program or through their consultancy work. We know that we have already established the Cooperative Development Authority, and through the years, they have improved on their ways of improving the capacity of cooperatives. We have Code NGO, okay, which also helps a lot in the capacity building area. We have the Philippine Council for Non-Government Certification. We have PhilDRA. All of these are national organizations that are supporting younger, smaller organizations. And other larger NGOs, like for instance, for helping urban poor, you have Philippine Action for Community-Led Shelter Initiatives. For help assisting fisher folk and capacity building for fisher folk, you have Coastal Conservation and Education Foundation Incorporated and various other things, various other organizations. Government agencies as well have their own capacity programs for non-government organizations, especially people's organizations, because it's also in their interest to develop the capacity of the people's organizations that they work with. Coalitions, when organizations become part of coalitions or federations, there's also a lot of capacity building that is involved. So what I'm saying here is perhaps back in the 86, when there was an influx of so many young, new civil society organizations, there was a dearth in capacity building forums, no? But through the years, I think that there has been a lot of capacity building that has happened as far as the VSO is concerned. So this is probably why a university program for building capacity of VSOs have a very small market now. Also because probably because you know, an entire program, many, you know, VSOs, the characteristics of voluntary sector organizations is they're much more flux, you know, and working 2 years on a MA is not always possible with all the work that is being done on the field. So where then lies the niche of the UPOU VSM education? If this is the case, I think the strength, and should be the strength of the UPOU VSM education, is that it is embedded within the MPM program, the Masters of Public Management program. So implied, there's an implicit link between the the policy, the study of policy, the study of local governance, and the study of the voluntary sector. Okay. The core, what links the three, I think, is the idea of participatory governance. More and more, we should explore, I think, the area of participatory governance, as this is the theme that would that would cut through the three areas of specialization in the MPM program. There are opportunities that have happened in recent years. For instance, there is, as I said, expanded participation at the LGU level. The bottom-up budgeting, although this has already been abolished, okay, is one area where there's a lot of capacity building that needs to be done if we have to have effective participation in the local government. There are, of course, the pros and the cons in the assessment done by PIDS. There are pros and cons of the bottom-up budgeting, and there are certain specific recommendations that have been made for strengthening if such a program would be pursued in the future. There is a strengthening of mandatory public consultation. In my city alone, every bill that has to pass, every resolution, no, not every local ordinance that has to pass through public consultation. In fact, even in the barangay, at the barangay level, public consultation is necessary through our barangay general assemblies. Another opportunity is the full implementation, what is supposed to be the full implementation of the local government code through the ruling that was done by the Supreme Court on the Mandanas-Garcia ruling. As you know, this allows for greater funding, greater share of funds for local government, and therefore should be an opportunity for local government to expand its work and involve the participation of civil society. More recently, there has been a move. It is a DILG memorandum circular as of 2001, which seeks to establish people's councils across the different municipalities and cities of the country. People's Council will be made up of civil society organizations. At present, there are 4 existing People's Councils, but already other cities and municipalities are looking towards establishing their own People's Council. My own city just recently had a meeting, and they're pushing for the formation of our own People's Council. In my reflection, having been involved in many of the participatory activities of my city, I find that effective LGU engagements with civil society is a two-way street. Often when the DILG looks at the participation, they think of building the capacity of CSOs, because the CSOs have to be informed, organized, efficacious, accountable, transparent, legitimate, skilled, and empowered. But likewise, I see that LGUs also need capacity building if we are to have effective LGU engagement. LGUs have to learn or have to have systems of transparency, accountability, must have a pro-people stand and skilled in the consultative process. This last one, I find sorely missing. Other opportunities, oh, sorry, I went back. Like I said also earlier, there is also the expanded role of civil society at the national and international arena. For this, I think there is need to build the knowledge and skills of CSOs to be engaged more effectively with national government, as well as the international bodies. Also, but more importantly, I think CSOs that are engaging at the national and international arena should touch base, should continue to keep touching base with the grassroots to be able to remain as a legitimate voice of the grassroots. And the challenges, we still have, we know very well, a system of politics that puts the system of patronage politics. We have a lot of our political dynasties, and corruption is still very rampant. This is an environment where civil society's presence may not be too welcome. Back in 86, there was a phrase called the gringo, no? The government run or organized non-government organizations. Okay, this was coined by the civil society groups back in 86. Okay, so many organizations that were formed there may be government run or government run or government initiated NGOs. We still have those, I find, especially because because it's the target of certain agencies to work with civil society, and therefore they form civil society NGOs. Okay, but the other thing that has a phenomenon that has happened is with the presence of pringos. Now, what are pringos as opposed to the gringos? These are politician run or initiated non-government organizations. Politicians have found a way to take advantage of the participatory clause by putting up their own NGOs and putting them up front to be part of the civil society, so that promoting their own personal interests rather than the general welfare. VSOs, on the other hand, tend to have parochial still. To these days, they tend to have parochial and restricted focus, okay, which hinders also their effective participation. And we know, and Philem earlier pointed out the need for democratic space. Globally, studies have shown that our civic space, the space for democratic participation of civil society organization, has been decreasing. And COVID-19, in fact, was used as a way by which civic space has been curtailed in some countries, including our own. From the academic perspective, we find that there's a dearth of materials on the work of VSO voluntary sectors in the Philippines. Voluntary sectors, non-government organizations are concerned with day-to-day work. There's very little time to do reflection on the work that has been done, much less to write about it. If voluntary sector organizations write at all, it is to write donor reports. And donor reports are very, very different from what the kinds of materials that we need to do to be able to effectively teach how voluntary sector organizations operate in the country. So some recommendations I'd like to put up. I think UPOU needs to strengthen the link between the PPA, the local government and regional administration, and the voluntary sector management tracks of the MPM program. We need to expand the audience of the study of the VSM. I think that in the document that we reviewed for the approval of this track in the MPM, specifically said we target voluntary sector professionals as well as academics. I think it's also legitimate to say that VSM should also be a field of study for people in the bureaucracy and in the political arena, because it is also their task. No, it's not just the task of CSOs to take part in government. It is, according to our constitution and the local government code, the task of government to be able to encourage, to be able to generate effective participation from VSOs. And that therefore, the study of VSOs, if we are to move forward in trying to, if the government, various government agencies and the bureaucracies to understand how VSOs operate, I think there is space for them to learn that in the VSM program. We need to strengthen research and documentation because, as I pointed out earlier, there is dearth of materials to really document what has been going on in the past 30 years of civil society in the Philippines. Okay, we need also to work towards studying volunteer management because of the need to develop citizenship, as well as the protection and the strengthening of our democratic spaces. We need to build the capacity for linking up and strengthening people's organizations and grassroots organizations, because, as I said, if we are to be the legitimate voice of the people's organization, there has to be a strong linkage between NGOs and people's organizations. Finally, there is, this is not finally, there's another one. Okay, we talk also about exploring global citizenship and global civil society. Increasingly, the issues that we face are international in character. Many of the international fora that we need to attend as non-government organization requires a level of understanding of what is going on at the international fora. And I think there is space for us to use the VSM program as a way of building global citizenship and global and taking part as participants in the global civil society. Finally, and this is really the finally now, okay, so we need to strengthen this capacity of VSOs in to have substantive discussion of the issues. I particularly single out the environment, which is my own particular area of work. There's a strong need to build the capacity of people, civil society organizations, people's organizations in the understanding of what is going on, because the biggest threat that we are facing right now is environmental, and there is not going to be a talk of pro people development unless we protect our environment. Okay, so finally, I say thank you. Congratulations on your 25th, and may your tribe prosper.
Thank you so much, Miss Maria Victoria D. Bautista, for that talk. And once again, let's give a warm round of applause to all of our three speakers. And as promised, we will now open the floor for your questions here in the venue and online. So please approach our microphones. We have 2 microphones on the floor. Please introduce yourself and address your question to our specific speakers. Anyone would like to begin? Go ahead, ma'am. Ma'am Quaresma.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to earn my free trip and lunch and merienda. So anyway, I would like to ask and share some of my thoughts on voluntary sector management. So it appears, well, at least to me, it appears to me that the government the Philippine government is not very friendly to voluntary sector participants, the civil society, and non-government organizations. And there are signs, and I will not mention them. Well, the Kaliwa Dam incident, perhaps. But otherwise, my question would be, and I'll go direct to my question, what would you suggest as ways to expand the audience of the voluntary sector management study and education? And as Dr. Victoria said, that we engage more of people from the government. And I think also that the people from the government need that kind of education, awareness, and value, embracing the value coming from the voluntary sector. So how would you see the expansion of members of the government people, civil servants, seeing VSM as a source of value in their work and encouraging them to enroll or study VSM? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ma'am Quaresma. Any of the speakers would like to comment?
If I may.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Okay. I speak from my role as a member of the civil society. It takes a lot of effort to try to influence government. When my group takes part in dialogues with government, you can see the difference in the perspective. It's very clear. You know how, like recently we had joint work with our city on an environmental issue, and we can see very clearly how different we work and how different they work. Okay, but I think through our effort, we had been gradually influencing how they view our work. We have been increasingly invited to participate in various various discussion, where we contribute our own ideas. So it takes, I think, being engaged with them. One way, I think, to be able to influence their thinking about civil society organizations is the engagement process. It is not always conflictual, although we are quite open also when we have our conflicting points of view. We take a stand. We definitely do not just go on along with their ideas. But in some sense, I think by engaging with them on a professional level, we are in some ways influencing how they view us. Now, that has to, of course, to be on a much broader scale, I think, to be done to be able to influence the whole thing. There are areas of work that has to be done in terms of policy, so that the civic space can be strengthened. The DILG, in its own way, I think, is finding ways by which a stronger civil society can be involved in governance. There are moves of the DILG to be able to bring in the civil society groups. So I think DILG is key entry point. If you want more government participation or government understanding of civil society, I think the DILG, that's for our friends from Europe, that's the Department of Local Government, and the Department of Interior and Local Government. I think the DILG would be a key area for marketing our program.
Thank you, Ms. Vicky. Other speakers, do you want to comment or will proceed? Go ahead.
Just in relation to the Irish situation, we have had a long history. Can you hear me okay? We have a long history of a partnership relationship between government and civil society organizations. And one of the debates that has developed within civil society organizations over the years has been in relation to what extent this is an open, transparent, and honest consultation process about the needs of society and the needs of voluntary sector organizations, these partnership structures, and to what extent it's about government incorporating dissent into government. In other words, ban it off and preventing voluntary sector organizations from raising their own independent voices. And it's a balance that has to be considered whenever voluntary sector organizations are working with government. I mean, I'm not anti-government because we need government, but I'm just saying that it's one thing that people have to think about in terms of voluntary sector organizations involved in government. To what extent does that police them? Does that mean that they are buying into policy and programs of a particular government that maybe they don't agree with? And for me, I think that it is vitally important that there be conversations with government, consultation with government, and partnership with government. But I also think that voluntary sector organizations need to have independence, because they're given a voice to often disenfranchised people, and those people are disenfranchised for particular reasons. And sometimes the people that have power in society want to keep them disenfranchised. So we need to be, we need to provide a safe space for the voluntary sector, which is independent, which allows people to have a voice, while at the same time educating government to the benefits of involving people in the governing of their societies. So that's all I would say on that.
Thank you. Dr. Mike, do you have an input? Or
I'm approaching the question. Thank you very much for the question. I'm approaching the question from the pedagogical and the educational perspective. Yes, the VSM, the voluntary sector management course, is very valuable to the society, to the Philippine society. And I would like to add a German example for this, because our universities are also responsible to participate in the society, especially in social and civic engagement. And we have to take the role as we call it a third mission of the university. And there's actually a project I remember a few years ago, I think 3 years ago. I worked with students on a project, a so-called service learning project. These are projects in the course of the study where they have to apply the knowledge and the theories and the methods they learned in the program to solve practical problems in the society. And we worked with youth in a rural town close to Dresden, and we engaged with pupils from a school to create their own youth club and to fund their own youth club with a crowdfunding campaign. And we trained those people, or better to say, my students trained those people those youths to do their own crowdfunding campaign. And they have been successful, but they have only been successful because of the partnership we created. We involved social workers in this project, as well as the students from our university, and also members of the city council and from the local government, from the city government, to engage in this kind of project, because this has been a way to do city development and also society development in their city. And so they were eager to engage in this project. And what I wanted to say is, with these practical projects, students can be involved, and also the government can be involved in a conversation, and in a practical conversation, to solve problems that lay in the city. So the point I would like to make is to think about those kind of constellations of service learning courses, possibly, which helps to involve the government in practical thinking and in projects, so to say.
Thank you, Dr. Mike. Okay, we have 3 quick questions from the floor. Go ahead. Please proceed to the mic. Miss and sir.
Hi, hello. Greetings and respect to everyone who are currently here. I am Ma'am Ethel Ann from Don Honorio Ventura State University in Bacolor, Pampanga. Together with me is the Dean of the Graduate School, Dr. Dolores T. Kembao, and of course, Professor Charlie Padilla. So, again, my greetings and respect to all the persons and personnel who are far behind of this program. And of course, I would like to congratulate our ever best and efficient speakers we have right now in this session. My question goes to anyone po who wish to answer. Upon following the theme of our scenario for today, which is to traverse the kind of system that we have amidst global trends. So it's like, how do we ensure that as a part of the cog in the wheel theme of process, knowing the multi-sectoral corporations, including the international and national institution, how do we continue to traverse and be sure that the clientele that we are serving are actually gearing towards not only for the future, but more so to prepare us for what should we really be gearing towards to. So it's like, upon all the suggestions, as I was listening to all our speakers, aside from the commendations and conclusions that we have, looking at the Filipino settings and across the global nations, since we continue to experience different scenarios, how do we keep up? How do we adopt and adapt to these new trends that we are experiencing, provided that we should gear towards the international relationships that we have? So once again, thank you very much and have a pleasant afternoon.
Thank you for your question. Anyone from our speakers can answer? Go ahead, sir.
I think when we're talking about voluntary sector management, then we have to be aware of the changing contexts in which the voluntary sector operates. In the Irish context, for example, we have moved from a situation where the voluntary sector was dominated by the Catholic Church to a situation from the 1970s on where it was the increase in secularization of society meant that we had the growth of secular organizations. The joining of the European Union meant that we had changed context in the sense that we had greater immigration. The development of the Celtic group became known as the Celtic Tiger, when for the first time in its existence, the Irish state became a rich state, because up until the 1990s, the Irish state was regarded often. I mean, I remember attending a conference in Ireland in the 1980s, early 1980s, and the conference was entitled, "Is Ireland a third world country?" Because Ireland was seen as an underdeveloped country, a former colony, a country that had limited capital base, unable to provide for its people, massive immigration. Its greatest export was its people right around the world. And by the late 1990s, we had the development for the first time of foreign direct investment, the development of industry, the development of wealth, which meant that in the early 2000s, the OECD reckoned that Ireland was the second richest country in the world per capita. So there was massive change in terms of the economy. There's massive change in terms of immigration. The Irish population today on the island of Ireland is about 7 million. At the time of the Irish famine in the middle of the 19th century, we had 8 million people. We're probably the only country in Europe which has decreased its population. In the early 2000s, we had for the first time net immigration into the country, which has meant that at the moment we have about 17 to 20% of our population who were born outside Ireland. So we have massive diversity. We have more than 100 languages spoken now in Dublin, when in the past, you would be a monolingual society. generally speaking, we had Irish language along the coast being spoken. They were native language of the Irish people, and English was the predominant language. Now we have 100 being spoken in family homes. So we have massive diversity. So what I'm trying to suggest by that is that we have change in context. And when we have change in social context, change in economic context, change in cultural context, and also change in political context. Historically in Ireland, we have conservative governments. Now we've seen the growth of more left-wing organisations, more organisations which are less conservative. So we have change in political context. What we, as educators, have to be aware of is that change in context. And those change in voluntary sector organisations which grew up to meet that change in context. And we have to include that within our education. So it means reviewing our courses, our curricula, and ensuring that we take on board all of those types of change and developments. Sorry.
Thank you so much. Anyone would like to add? Or let's proceed to the next question. Okay. Next question, please, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Jules. Good afternoon to our speakers. Well, thank you very much for a rather extensive discussion of DSM. It's really appreciated. We were just, however, looking at the theme of this webinar, and it's very clear to us that the pro-people side or aspect of BSM was well, clearly articulated, easily deduced from the discussions. But we're also thinking about the gender equality aspect. How do you see the prospects of BSM education addressing gender equality as a core value, for example, in its in agenda? So the question is addressed to any one of our speakers. Yeah, we hope to get your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Anyone from the speakers?
Okay, if I may.
Go ahead, po.
Okay. Very clearly in the Philippine context, our constitution is very clear on the role of women in development. That there is emphasis being given in the role of women in development, and we know from history that the women's movement in the Philippines is one that is transcended. You know, it has moved and grown through the years. In the work that we do, there's a lot of space as well for women to take part in government. So while I talked about participation in government in general, one aspect, of course, one of the marginalized group that needs to be heard in government is, of course, the women's groups. Quite a lot of a number of organizations, not too many, I suppose, a number of organizations in my city, for instance, that are part of the City Development Council are women's groups. To what extent are they able to bring their issues to the fore? I think, again, depends on capacity and what those issues are. Very often, the issues that they bring to the City Development Council are economic, livelihood, the need to have livelihood. The more, how do you say, the more liberal groups of women's organizations are staying out of the city council, but we do have them, and in some ways they are able to bring to fore their issues in other fora. Okay, in other forums like public fora, they could organize their own. They're not a part of how do you say, the official structure of consultation, but they certainly are part of what needs to be the groups that need to be consulted. So I think that in strengthening people's participation, we also must make that space for women to be able to discuss the issues that they prioritize, okay, to the city council or the local government or the national movement. I think, for instance, I think at the national level, we have our large organizations like Gabriela representing women's groups, which is I think, a very welcome uh, development of what, yeah. So maybe at the local level that needs to be strengthened, but at least at the very least, at our national level, we have representation in our legislation through our Gabriela and other women's groups.
Thank you, Miss Vicky. Yes,
For a
sir.
second, I think it's important to remember that women are the majority in countries around the world. So they have amazing power if they can only utilize that power in order to end their disenfranchisement and end their exclusion from power, I suppose, and from governance. And I think that Ireland, if you want to study Ireland, I'm talking about the Irish state now, the Republic of Ireland. If you want to study Ireland, you can see how the women's movement and women's organisations have brought about amazing changes in Ireland since the 1970s, including things like liberating women from childbirth, unplanned childbirth, for example, and in terms of changes in the Constitution. Constitution originally was very much dominated in gender orientated in terms of its language. Women's place was in the home. From the 1870s onwards, we've had changes to our constitution, again, as a result of civil society organisations representing women demanding change. Now we have in Ireland, for example, quotas for political parties whenever they're putting up candidates in elections. Political parties get funded by the state if they put up so many candidates in an election, and that funding gets cut if they don't have at least 30% of their candidates being women. So there are a whole range of different ways in which voluntary sector organisations representing women's interests can bring about change. The most important thing, I think, for women to remember is they're the majority in society. So that gives you, even from a psychological point of view, a certain amount of power. Sorry.
All right, thank you so much. We need to entertain some questions or comments from online. So there's a comment from Zoom. This is by Dr. Finaflor Thailan. I am happy to hear from the second speaker that the social work profession has been recognized as a greenhouse learning hub for voluntary sector management, because it is indeed such as what we have in the social work program in UPOU. The values and goals provided by the first speaker and the niche of the VSM on participatory governance, as discussed by the third speaker, are the same ingredients and elements in the social work program, especially in UPOU. Collaborations among the programs such as MPM, social work, women and development, and even environment and health would facilitate sustained relevance and groundedness on these programs, including the possible networks and alliances that they can possibly create, will help ensure fulfilling our shared public ethos and purposes. All right. Okay. Thank you so much for that. I guess we need to wrap up and entertain one last question from the... Okay, last two questions. Okay. Sir, and we'll end with Miss Diola's question.
Thank you very much, moderator. This is Dr. Wu. Right now, I'm the visiting professor at the University of the Philippines, NCPAC. And I'm a professor from, retired professor actually from Taiwan. I would like to give you a witness. When I was listening to three speakers sharing, that reminds me, in the year of 2000, in Taiwan, there is a very unique non-political legislation called National Volunteer Service Act. And this act was passed by the highest legislative body in Taiwan. And because of this voluntary volunteer service act, that it have great impact all the for the all sectors. You know, it's not only in the public sector, private sector, even on the non-governmental NGO sector. Now they provide a great impact, which I observe, you know, after 13 years now. When I look back, it does create a lot of influence to transform the society from social development into a societal development. That is a deepen citizens, among citizens, their intimacy, which we call intimate citizenship. And this voluntary service act, which also accelerating the transformation of the barangay. In Taiwan, we call village leader, village captain, or township captain, or we have another system so-called Li captain, which we empower those barangay leaders, and they can use the volunteer in their own community and provide non-partisan or even civil society in the service, and to help and to enhance the quality of any public service or social welfare service that they are responsible for. So I would like to witness that this is a great time for our UPOU in our MPM program, that we should accommodate the VSO for this social work management or in a volunteer sectors management. The definition of the democracy, it says rule by the people. Therefore, we have to find the opportunity to uplift, to cultivate, and to strengthen our citizens. For them, of course, they are the master of the society. However, in addition to declare their rights, they need to fulfill their duty. Not only fulfill their duty, they need to learn how to provide the services. Not only provide the services, they have to seek opportunity to have the social innovation. The law on the year of the 2000 Voluntary Service Act does provide impetus and accumulate the momentum for the society. Therefore, I strongly recommend that this program is directly related to public management program. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that intervention. Let's end with an intervention or question from Ma'am Diola. Okay. Then our speakers can comment on the intervention of Sir and of Ma'am Diola. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Faina Diola. My residential college is at the National College of Public Administration and Governance. So I teach public administration theories and research and voluntary sector management. And here at the UPOU FMDS, I also teach voluntary sector management. My question is more, maybe question or comment is more philosophical and pedagogical. In terms of finding, because voluntary sector management has been embraced by the in my college under public administration, and here it is in the field of public management. Therefore, my question is, in terms of teaching voluntary sector management, what do you emphasize as the publicness of the voluntary sector? So why is it embraced, and what is its place, therefore, in public management or in public administration? I think it's very much related to what Dr. Mu has mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma'am Diola. Let's take that as the final statement of our speakers. Let's begin with who'd like to start? Anyone? As your final statement for this afternoon. Dr. Phelim. Go ahead.
I suppose my view on it is that civil society organisations are part of the public. They are I mean, if we're talking about societies being organised and being run for the benefits of people, then people in civil society organisations are often involved in those organisations because they want to improve the quality of life for people in their communities and in their societies, and globally as well. Those, for example, Vicky had mentioned about the importance of the environment, and of course the environment can't exclude the rest of the world. We have to talk about it globally. So voluntary sector organisations, civil society organisations are the public. So that's one of the reasons why you would want to involved in public management. I suppose there's a whole lot of debate around what we mean by management. Are we talking about managing people? Are we talking about managing workers? Are we talking about managing our clients? Or are we talking about managing the resources in society to promote well-being for people in society? So that's one of the main reasons why you'd want to involve voluntary sector management of organisations, voluntary sector organisations within public management. And I think it's a good thing to do. The question, I suppose, then is there a difference between public sector and voluntary sector? And I just mentioned that, something to think about anyway. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Dr. Phelim O. Hadmail, for that response. Now let's hear it from Dr. Mike Arnold.
Yeah, thank you very much for the comments and all the questions. And I also see the social work management or the voluntary management as a way to prepare students not only with knowledge and with a training for practice to find a job, but also to find their role in society. And so it's up to us as educators to train those students to develop their own attitude and how to engage in conversation with the government, with the community. And so we, in our study program, we integrated quite recently a study module which is called critical social work or critical management perspectives, which involves questions of why did the inequality and the income inequality in society increased in the last few decades, despite all the activities of social workers. And so they need to face the current situation and think creatively about what can be done and how they can advocate for the people in society. And so these are also qualities, these are also skills that need to be trained. And this is one way we approach this. And another way would be to work with case studies which involve different perspectives, especially how to deal with interdisciplinary or in interprofessional situations where different workers from different parts, from the health services, from the social work services, from the public administration have to work together and to focus in education on these topics. This is, which has become in recent years really relevant to our education program. And this is something I can also recommend for the development of other programs.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mike Arnold. And now let's end it with Miss Maria Victoria Di Bautista.
I would like to echo what Philip has said earlier. Civil society is the public. Okay, and therefore their engagement in their involvement in public matters is a matter of being part of that public that the government is supposed to serve. In the case of the Philippines, the Constitution clearly mandates our government to take the position of the civil society groups and to listen to them and to involve them in governance. These are marching orders that come directly from the highest law of the land. And therefore, I think involving civil society is something that should be the concern of all government agencies, from the national all the way down to the village level.
All right. Thank you so much, Miss Vicky. Okay, so now, of course, thank you so much to all of you who shared your questions. We are still receiving questions online. Unfortunately, due to time limitation, we need to end our open forum. Instead, you may email mpm@25@upou.edu.ph. That will be posted also in the comment section in Zoom, and we'll be happy to relay it to our speakers. We'll now proceed to the awarding of certificates. Of course, this certificate will be sent to you via email, right? Yes. Okay, so allow me to read the citation. University of the Philippines Open University, Faculty of Management and Development Studies, Master of Public Management, presents this certificate of appreciation to Dr. Phelim O. Handmail, Dr. Mike Arnold, and Miss Maria Victoria D. Bautista as resource persons for the hybrid webinar VSM Education Amidst Global Trends, Meeting the Challenges of Pro-People Development. Given this 24th day of February 2023 and celebration of MPM at 25 with the theme Open, Online, and Onwards, Meeting the Challenges Ahead. During the 28th UPOU anniversary at the CCDL Auditorium, UPOU Headquarters, Los Baños, Laguna, signed by Ms. Juvie Lizette M. Hervasio, Assistant Professor and Program Chair of MPM, and Dean Joan V. Serrano of FMDS. Thank you so much. Let's give a warm round of applause to our speakers. Now let's head on to the closing remarks. Let's call in our Dean, Dean Joan V. Serrano.
So let me express my sincerest thanks to our speakers for sharing their time and expertise. This topic is close to my heart since I myself is part of a civil society and actually a main convener of a people's organization. And as we celebrate the anniversary of the People Power Revolution, this webinar is indeed very timely and relevant. And as we come to the end of this webinar with the focus on meeting the challenges of gender equity and pro-people development, again, I want to express my gratitude to everyone who participated in this insightful and thought-provoking event. The theme of this webinar is of utmost importance in today's world, and I'm glad that the table there emphasized the importance of gender equity, where issues of gender equity and people participation and pro-development are critical concerns for the voluntary sector. And the discussions during this webinar indeed have shed light on the challenges of facing voluntary sectors and in teaching voluntary sector management, as well as the possibilities for social change in our society and the role of education in addressing these global challenges. And as we have learned from the diverse perspective of our speakers, from foreign, Irish, German, and the Philippine perspectives, education plays a crucial role in really equipping individuals with knowledge, skills, and attitudes needed to promote gender equity and pro-people development. And it is through education that we can build a culture of respect and inclusivity and empower individuals to become change agents in our communities. Again, I want to extend my congratulations to the working team. So working team, please stand up and be recognized. Let's give them a round of applause. And of course, to our speakers and our participants for your contribution to this webinar. Your insights and experiences have indeed enriched our understanding of the challenges and opportunities facing the voluntary sector in promoting gender equity and pro-people development. And in closing, let us continue to work together to create a world where various sectors, especially the civil society and the voluntary sector in our society, are working harmoniously together with the public and private sectors. Thank you and mabuhay.
Thank you so much, Dean Joan Serrano. Again, let's give her a warm round of applause. Thank you so much, ma'am. And as we come to the end, we'd like to remind everyone to please accomplish the evaluation form. so you can have, they're having certificates, right? Yes. So you need to answer the feedback form first. Okay, maybe also ask everyone here on site to please rise for a photo opportunity. Please rise. And for those online, you may also turn on your cameras together with the audience in the online. Should they compress or that's fine? So there we have it. Happy 25th anniversary to the Master of Public Management program of the UPOU. Once again, I'm Jules Giang. Thank you so much.